He saw her first in the back alley behind Elias Finch's tavern, her shawl half torn from her shoulders, a blood-wet hand pressed to her mouth to silence her own crying. Two boys, brothers by the look of them, stood watching while old Mamie Calhoun threw a bucket of hog wash over the widow's feet. "Go on, beast," Mamie spat. "Drag your sins to hell with you." The boys didn't move, didn't interfere. Neither did the other townsfolk threading down the main street with their baskets and pails. The sheriff passed on horseback without a word. When she staggered to her knees, trying to crawl toward the scrub road out of town, Mamie kicked her down again. That was the first time Silas Merrick laid eyes on the woman they called Widow Roan. He didn't know what they blamed her for yet, only that the hate on their faces wasn't fresh. It was rooted, deep as sagebrush and just as mean. But what struck Silas harder was the way she held herself, not proud, not defiant, just stubborn enough to live through it. She didn't cry out when Mamie struck her, didn't beg. She waited, took the boot, spit her own blood, and rose, barefoot on the gravel, steady as a fence post. Silas had spent 15 years riding fence and branding cattle across the territories. He'd owned 3 ranches and lost one to fire, one to drought, and one to the bank. He fought off rustlers with a rifle and watched men die bleeding out in the dust over poker hands, but he'd never seen a woman take a beating with that kind of silence. Not like she was broken, like she was enduring. He stayed at the boarding house that night, up on the edge of town where the wind carried less dust and fewer voices. Mrs. Kerner brought him stew and cornbread and made polite talk about the coming spring thaw. He answered where he had to, but his thoughts kept circling the image of that woman, the half-cloak of black hair matted to her temple, the ragged blue hem of her dress clinging to her knees. He asked Mrs. Kerner who she was. Mrs. Kerner paused, spoon halfway to her lips. "Widow Roan," she said, voice flattening. "Best keep clear of her. She's cursed, or worse. Took her husband with her bad luck and a child too, far as I heard. Nobody comes to her aid but fools or strangers, and this town don't take kindly to either." "What did she do?" "Born wrong, maybe, or just married a man folks hated. Don't matter now, best she leaves, but she won't say why, just takes the licks and stays." Silas nodded and didn't press more. The next day, he found her again. She was behind the old church, tending a line of withered turnips someone had thrown down for pigs. She cleaned the dirt from them careful with a piece of canvas and a chipped spoon, working like it meant something. Her knuckles were scabbed raw. A new welt bloomed purple under her right eye. He stood 5 paces from her and waited. She didn't look up, just said, "If you're here to tell me leave, I'll save your breath. I don't take charity, and I don't run." "I ain't here to pity you." She scraped another turnip. "You got a name?" he asked. She gave him a long look then, shadowed and wary. "Mercy." "That a joke?" "No." He waited. "Mercy Roan." He nodded once. "Silas Merrick, I own the Blue S." Her gaze flickered. She knew the ranch. Everybody did. It sat on 3,000 acres of the best grazing land in the eastern range, ran close to the Arkansas line. The herds there were fat and well kept, the barns new built. Men called it the finest spread in 2 counties. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "I want to know why a woman who takes that kind of beating stays in a town full of cowards." She smiled then, but it wasn't kind. "Not your business." "Maybe not, but it could be. You think I'm looking to be saved." "No," he said. "I think you're looking to end something, just haven't figured how." She stood stiff and slow, the left side of her skirt stained dark from a split seam. The cold bit through her sleeves. "I was 17 when I came here, married a man 35. Name was Eli Roan. He was cruel, made folks fear him. Then he got gutted in a poker room 4 winters back. They blamed me, said I drove him to madness. Said I poisoned him with grief because my baby died in her sleep while he was gone 6 days drunk. After that, they decided I owed them something for his death, for the girl too. Sailors didn't speak. She stepped close till her breath fogged just below his collar. They take from me daily, but I stay, because there's a price, and I aim to make sure it gets paid in full. He nodded again. You ever need a place, the Blue S has room. Don't got to work, don't got to talk, just don't let them kill you before the reckoning comes. She tilted her head like he was speaking a language she hadn't heard in years. Then turned and walked away. That was February. By March, he'd see her stoned in the street. By April, bleeding from the ear, teeth gone, she always got back up, always found her way to some cold corner to sleep in, and always, come morning, her eyes were clearer than the ones who hit her. It wasn't pity that grew in him, it was recognition. He'd watched calves drown and men be hanged, but he'd never seen someone so marked for ruin who kept standing. She didn't fight fair, she didn't beg, but she endured. And that kind of woman, he knew, didn't come from nothing. That kind of woman was born for vengeance. And he wanted to see it done. He waited, bought parcels near town, watched the names on deeds change hands. He learned who had pushed her child's coffin into the fire to spare the memory, who stripped her husband's corpse and left it by the mine road, who spat on her food, who burned her shed. Then, on the first day of May, he rode into town in a dark coat and a bone-handled pistol at his hip. He found her in the livery stable, stitching the belly of a mule. "Marry me," he said. She looked up, not startled, not mocking, just tired. "Why?" "Because I want to give you my name, my land, my shield. And because the longer your widow roan, the longer they'll think they can beat you without cost." "I don't need your name." "No, but you could use the weight of mine." She tied off the stitch, wiped her hands on a cloth stiff with blood. "Is it pity?" she asked. "No, it's war." She didn't answer. "Tomorrow," he said, "high noon, you say yes, I'll be at the church. Say no, and I won't bother you again." He left her there, standing with mule blood on her skirt and fire in her eyes. By nightfall, word had spread through the saloons and shops. The whole town would be watching. But he didn't ride home. He waited in the dark by the ridge, where he could see the chapel's steeple catch moonlight like a blade. Because whatever choice she made, Silas Merrick knew one thing for certain. Something had started, and someone would bleed for it. The bell above the chapel door hadn't rung in 7 years. Dust lined the pews like ash, and the windows bore cracks from last winter's storm. But when the sun reached its highest edge above the dry hills, the bell tolled once. Not by any hand, just a gust through the tower, strong enough to shift the iron tongue inside the rusted bronze throat. Silas stood at the front, plain black coat, hat off, boots polished with oil and spit. No preacher, no flowers, no family, only Mercy Roan walking steady down the center aisle like she was headed for a hanging. Her hair was combed, clean. The bruises were still visible but dulled, the worst of them yellowing like old fruit. She wore a dress not meant for marrying, a simple brown thing with mended sleeves and a stain near the hem. But she walked like it meant something to come through that door. She didn't speak as she stood beside him. Neither did he. He took a ring from his coat pocket. It had belonged to his mother. No shine, no stone, just a silver band bent slightly at the bottom from years of wear. He held it out. She took it, slid it on herself. No vows were spoken. She didn't flinch when he touched her hand. No one witnessed it but the wind and the dust and God. When they stepped out into the street, the town was waiting. They lined the boardwalks in silence. Mamie Calhoun crossed herself. The sheriff spat. Children stood behind their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed. Silas nodded once, took Mercy by the arm, and walked her to his horse. He didn't ride fast. He made sure they watched every hoof fall as the widow roan left town with her chin high, no shame in her step, no leash around her throat. At the Blue S, she said little. She walked the fence line twice, counted each outbuilding, slept in the small cabin behind the barn, though Silas offered her the main house. For days, she rose before sunup and wandered the hills like she was searching for something she couldn't name. She didn't touch his money, didn't ask questions, but she watched. Watched the hands who came and went, the old Mexican foreman with the crooked leg, the three brothers who ran the southern pastures. She watched the cook who carried a scar from ear to collar and never spoke above a whisper. She watched the ledgers when Silas left them open on the table, eyes tracking the columns like she once run numbers herself. Silas never asked her what she wanted. He gave her time, and she took it like water in drought. A month passed before she said anything more than yes or no. They were fixing a fence post near the river bend. The soil there was dark, thick with clay. He dug while she held the beam upright. Sweat ran down her back. Her hands were blistered, but she never let go. "You don't want me," she said flat. "I didn't say I did. You don't love me." "No." "Then why?" He looked at her, long and level. "Because a woman doesn't walk through hell like you did without becoming something holy." She laughed once, harsh, not cruel but hollow. "Holy don't rot inside," she said. "Holy don't dream of knives." He planted the post, packed it tight, didn't answer. She left before dark, rode out alone, came back near midnight with 2 rabbits and a cut on her hand. He didn't ask where she went. She didn't say. Through the summer the town changed, not in speech, not in kindness, but in caution. No one threw stones at her now. No one dared spit. Mamie Calhoun crossed to the other side of the street when Mercy came to market. The boys who once shoved her into gutters now turned their faces to walls. The sheriff stared when she walked past, but never spoke. They didn't forget what they'd done, but they remembered something else now. That she had the name of a man who could bury them, and the eyes of someone who might still try, even without him. In July, a girl went missing. Sophie Barnes, 12 years old, red ribbon in her hair. They found her 3 days later, outside town, arms broken, dress torn. The town wept, howled, demanded justice. But they looked the other way when old Luther Wade was accused, because he owned the only freight line still running through winter. His wagons carried their seed, their goods, their coffins. So the sheriff claimed there wasn't proof. Sophie's father hanged himself a week later. And Mercy Roan did not speak. Not to Silas, not to the others. But the next moon, Luther Wade's barn burned to ash. The following week, his driver disappeared. Then his youngest son was found in the creek, throat slit. The sheriff rode to the Blue S with a posse of 4. Silas met them at the gate, alone. "You know what this is," the sheriff said. "This ain't your fight." "It is now," Silas replied. "She's my wife." "You protecting her." "She doesn't need protecting, but she won't stand alone." The sheriff stared hard. "She's killing folks." Silas didn't flinch. "She's balancing the scale. She'll hang for it." Silas stepped forward. "If you put a rope around her neck, you'd best put one around mine too." The sheriff chewed his cheek, hands twitching near the butt of his pistol. But he didn't draw, didn't ride in. The posse turned first. They rode back slow, muttering. That night, Mercy didn't come to supper. He found her behind the barn, washing blood from her hands in the trough. You think I'm damned? She asked. No, you think I'm done. He shook his head. I think you've only just started. She leaned against the wood, closed her eyes. You married me for war, she said. I thought I'd use your name like a knife. I didn't expect you to stay. I don't leave what's mine. I'm not yours. You are now. She opened her eyes. There was no softness in them, but something quieter. Not peace, not yet. Something colder, steel honed. I'm not through, she said. I know. Do you mean to stop me? He leaned against the trough beside her. No, he said, I mean to help. The moon rose behind them. The land stretched wide and dark, and the fire that had burned beneath her skin all these years took new shape. She wasn't Widow Roan anymore. She was Mercy Merrick, and she was going to teach the whole damn county what that name meant. By August, 3 names had vanished from the town's tax roll. No graves, no notices, just gone. Emmett Ross, who once held Mercy's arms while the sheriff took his turn. Harlan Pritchard, who'd locked her in the smokehouse with hogs for 2 days during the worst winter storm. And Judith Hale, who'd written a letter to the state claiming Mercy was mad, unfit, and deserving of institutional care. All 3 gone. The sheriff called for outside law, sent 2 wires, received no answer, sent 3 more. 1 marshal came and left the next day, refused to say why. At the Blue S, the men worked quieter now. They spoke low and moved quick. They didn't ask questions when Mercy rode out before dawn or came back past midnight with fresh scars and smoke on her breath. They didn't ask why the hounds had been taught new scents, or why the fence line near the North Woods had been electrified, even though there was no cattle kept there. She had begun training with the foreman, Marco's Rays. He taught her to throw a knife across 20 yards and hit the neck every time. She learned the reloading of a rifle by feel, could shoot from horseback by October, could kill in silence by November. Silas watched, said nothing. When she fell asleep in the chair by the stove, he laid a blanket over her shoulders. When her hands shook, he handed her water. He never asked what memory had surfaced, never touched her unless she touched him first, but he was always near. Their marriage was not warm, it was not tender, but it was rooted, thick and hard as mesquite, a pact forged under pressure, sealed by blood and silence. One night in early winter, she showed him a ledger. Names, dates, sins. Each mark is a weight, she said, each one I carry until it's spent. Will it end, he asked, when the list is gone? And then. She looked at him, then I rest. That night she came to his bed for the first time. Not for comfort, not for love, but for witness. He bore her scars without flinching, kissed none of them, traced each like a prayer. By morning she was gone again. Through December the wind turned, the mountains filled with snow. The roads became mud and then stone. She did not stop. She left flowers on Sophie Barnes' grave, spent a night in silence beside the rotted church where her daughter's name had been scratched out from the wood plaque. She waited outside the jailhouse until the sheriff drank himself sick, then poured kerosene through the cracks in his floor and lit the match with her teeth. He lived barely, but he left the territory by the end of the week. No one spoke of her anymore. Not in the shops, not in the saloons. Her name had become a kind of sickness, a warning, a myth. The widow Roan was dead. But Mercy Merrick rode the hills like a storm, and there wasn't a soul left who dared call her anything else. One of the hands, Jonah, asked Silas once, over coffee in the bunkhouse, if he was afraid of her. Every day, Silas said. Then why keep her? Because men should fear what they made. Think she'll kill you too. Silas looked toward the ridge, where she stood with a rifle, silhouetted against the sky. If I deserve it, he said, I hope she does. By New Year's, she had only 4 names left. Each one circled in red. And each one rich, protected, dug deep into the bones of the county. One was Judge Norridge, who signed away her land without trial after Eli's death. Another was Corrigan Price, who took over the mine and used her husband's death as leverage to seize everything she'd owned. The third, Willa Dunn, kept the orphanage books, sold Mercy's daughter's name for whiskey money. The last was Sheriff Amos Cobb, the man who'd held her down and called it mercy. He'd fled to the North Hills, where the law thinned and old debts died quiet. But she would not forget. And she would not wait. Silas saw it in her gait now, slower, weighted, not tired but nearing something final. She spoke less, slept less, ate only when reminded. But the hunger in her was fire. She rode out on the first night of January, leaving only a knife in the doorway, stuck deep in the frame. A message. She begun the last ride. Silas followed a day later. Not to stop her, to bury what remained when she was done. He found the first corpse strung from a cottonwood tree by the river. Judge Norridge, dressed in black robes, throat torn, Mercy's ledger nailed to his chest. The second, Willa Dunn, was found in the cellar of the old schoolhouse, surrounded by children's shoes and empty bottles. She had sewn her own eyes shut before dying. Price was harder, he had men. But she was smarter. She poisoned his horses, lit his barns, took down one guard, then another, then bled Price out in front of his wife, who only watched, pale and unblinking. And then Sheriff Cobb. Silas found her north of Barlow Ridge, tracking in snow. Her fingers were frostbitten, her horse limped, she hadn't eaten in 2 days. But she moved with purpose. He rode beside her without speaking. At dusk they found Cobb's camp, a shack with no roof, smoke rising. She didn't hesitate. Just looked at Silas once. If I don't come out, I'll burn it down, he said. She nodded and went in. What happened inside was not seen. But it lasted hours. Screams, then silence, then something worse than either. When she emerged, her hands were black with soot, her face streaked with tears. She dropped the knife beside her boots and walked to the fire. And for the first time in years, she wept, not in silence. She fell to her knees and wept like a child. He knelt beside her, held her. No words. She had finished the list. But it had not undone the grief. Only emptied the vessel. And that was something he understood. He carried her back on his horse. Not as a bride. Not as a widow. But as a woman who had done the unthinkable and survived. And now had to decide what came next. Winter laid heavy across the hills, turning the world to bone and silence. The days grew short, the nights cruel. Snow piled in the windbreaks, covered tracks, erased what had come before, and into that white hush Mercy disappeared. Not all at once. She stayed at the Blue S long enough to heal the worst of the cold bite. Her fingers blistered, one toe blackened, the edges of her mouth cracked from wind and blood. She didn't speak much, slept long hours and rose without sound, moved through the house like smoke, ghosted past the hands like they weren't there. Silas let her drift. She'd earned it. Some things have to unravel before they can mend. She took to sleeping in the loft above the tack room, away from the heat of the stove, away from him. At night, he heard her walking the rafters. At dawn, he found her coat hung outside, frozen stiff. She didn't ride, didn't train. The fire that once lit her was burning low. She read the ledger once each morning, not to add to it, just to remember. Then came spring, and with it, something new. An Eastern man arrived, finely dressed, riding a sorrel with brass tack, claimed to be from Denver, called himself Everett Jameson, said he was a writer, wanted to chronicle the remarkable and terrible journey of the infamous Mercy Merrick. He offered Silas money for interviews. Silas told him to ride on. Mercy met him at the gate. "You want a story," she said. "I want truth," he replied. "You can't handle it. I've handled worse." She stared at him, long and flat. "Then write this," she said. "Every man I killed had a name, had a sin. They earned what came." "And justice?" "No," she said. "Justice is polite. I dealt in reckoning." He shifted in his saddle. "You come back again. I'll take your tongue and bury it with the others." He didn't return. But the whispers did. Newspapers back east began to print her name, twisted into myth. The blood widow of the Blue S, the dark bride of Colorado. Vengeance in a black veil. Artists drew her with wings, with horns, with a lasso of fire. None of it true. None of it mattered. But it brought others. Men who wanted to see her, kill her, take her, break her. She shot the first through the eye from 100 paces before he even unsaddled. The second lasted longer, got close enough to knock her from her horse, break 2 ribs before Silas buried a hatchet in his back. After that, the ranch turned fortress. They built blind posts, dug trenches, posted signs, private, no mercy beyond this gate. The irony wasn't lost on her. But she didn't laugh. She hadn't laughed in months. Then came the girl. Ragged, thin, no name, couldn't speak. Found sleeping in the barn behind the hay, ribs like kindling, eyes wide and wild, a lash scar across her throat. Mercy knelt before her, held out her hand. The girl flinched but didn't run. She brought her water, bread, a blanket. No questions. The girl stayed. She followed Mercy like a shadow. Didn't speak for 2 weeks. Then one night by the fire, she said a single word. "Safe." Mercy didn't cry. But she didn't look away, either. And the next morning, she rode into town with the girl at her side. People scattered. The general store went silent. Mercy walked in, took what she needed, flour, salt, soap, a pair of boots for the girl, laid a single silver dollar on the counter. No one stopped her. No one dared. She said nothing, just met their stares like wind meets stone, unyielding, unafraid. Back at the ranch, she gave the girl her own bed, taught her to skin rabbits, to ride, to shoot, not for vengeance, for survival. The girl learned quick, didn't ask about the past. Neither of them needed to. By summer, the girl was smiling. Mercy wasn't. But there was less darkness in her steps. Fewer dreams. She began mending the barn roof, cleaned the ledger, removed names already paid in blood, closed it for good. Silas found her one evening sitting by the garden, hands in the dirt, the girl asleep at her side. "You ever think it'll be enough?" he asked. "No," she said, "but it's a start." "What now?" She shrugged. "Teach her to live, grow the land, keep the wolves from the door." "And you?" She looked out toward the pasture, where the sun was falling soft on the hills. "I was born for ruin," she said, "but maybe I'll die for something else." He sat beside her, close, not touching. And in the hush that followed, not quite peace but close enough, Mercy Merrick let herself rest. Not forget, never forgive, but breathe. And that was its own kind of miracle. Late that autumn, the girl began carving small animals from driftwood, foxes, goats, birds with wings poised like they were about to rise. She left them along the windowsills, on fence posts, tucked into coat pockets. Mercy never asked why. She just found them and carried them in her satchel like talismans, quiet reminders of something unspoken between them. The girl spoke more now. Her voice was thin, rasped from old damage, but clear. She called herself Lark. Said no surname, no place, no family. Mercy didn't press. A name was enough. The rest would come when it needed to. They rode the pasture together most days, checking fence lines, mending breaks. Lark learned to not wire, to shoot prairie dogs from a moving horse, to spot poison weed from a distance. She was young, maybe 10, but already her face had the tight-etched look of a survivor. She didn't cry. Not even when a stallion kicked her wrist clean backward and Silas had to set the bone with a stick and leather bite. She didn't scream, Silas said that night. Just stared at me like she was daring me to mess it up. She's not soft, Mercy said. She can't afford to be. You think she's like you. Mercy turned a knife slowly in her hand, watching the way firelight licked the steel. No, she said, she's still got a chance not to be. But chances are fragile things, and peace doesn't sit long in places that wear blood in the soil. The land agent came in November. Slick-suited, bowler-hatted, riding a rail car with a brass rail and linen curtains. Name was Vernon Temple. Said he represented the Gilded Ridge Company, newly chartered to bring a spur line west and a resort town with it. He offered Silas a buyout for the Blue S that could have bought 3 spreads farther east, land with rivers, land with orchards. Silas said no before the man finished his pitch. Temple smiled, polite and false. I'd encourage you to reconsider. Men who refuse us tend to find themselves overwhelmed by opportunity elsewhere. We built this land, Silas said. I won't hand it to thieves with paper and ink just because they don't wear guns. Temple adjusted his cufflinks. Then perhaps your wife will have more vision. Mercy was watching from the corral. She'd heard every word. She walked toward them slow, boots dragging a whisper through the dust. I'm not interested in gold-leaf railways or bathhouses full of drunk men, she said. I've already buried one world. I won't let you build another on top of it. Temple smiled wider. Mrs. Merrick, you misunderstand. Progress isn't something you can stop. It only pauses to step over the bones. She didn't speak again. But that night the train car burned on the siding, and Vernon Temple was found walking barefoot across the plain, screaming about wolves no one else could see. The company sent more men. This time armed. They came through the canyon in the dark, 8 riders with long coats and longer guns. They didn't expect traps, didn't expect mercy. They died without firing a shot. She and Silas dragged their bodies to the border of the land, staked a sign in the earth with a single sentence painted in blood. We are not for sale. The county sheriff, new, young, clean-shaved, rode out to investigate. He saw the sign, saw the bodies. He turned around without knocking. But the company didn't stop. They just changed tactics. Hired the kind of men who didn't wear badges, didn't write letters. Men with no names, no morals, no pasts. One came as a preacher. Poisoned 3 of the cattle with laced salt before Mercy cut his throat at the pulpit he built in the canyon. One came as a water inspector. He vanished, and a week later his boots were found tied to a branch above the poisoned creek, his toes gnawed down to bone. But one slipped through. He came as a traveler, wounded, limping, asking for help. Lark let him in. Mercy found her in the loft, held by the neck, knife at her ribs, a bag over her head. "Move and she dies," the man said. Mercy didn't move. She didn't speak. She just looked the man in the eye and smiled, the kind of smile that made war feel near. Then she dropped the pistol she carried, slowly, and knelt. "Take me," she said. "No," Lark croaked, "no." The man hesitated. And in that breath of doubt, Lark sank her teeth into his hand. He howled, Mercy lunged. The man got one cut across her cheek before she drove a rusted branding iron through his mouth. They buried him beneath the ash tree. After that, Lark didn't speak for 3 days, then only 2 words. "My fault." Mercy shook her head. "No, you're a child, they're men." "I trusted him." "You still can, but not yet, not again, not unless they bleed first." That night, Mercy took the branding iron and hung it above the hearth. A warning, a vow. The town, quiet for years, was stirring again. New money, new greed, the dead had faded to legend. Mercy's name was becoming distant, half remembered, half doubted. And the ranch was alone. She looked at Sila's, whose beard had gone to gray, whose hands shook when the weather turned. "They'll keep coming," she said. "I know. They want a war." Silas looked at her, at Lark, at the land behind them. "Then we'll give them one." She didn't smile, but she didn't look away. The blue S would not be sold. It would be remembered. Not for what it produced, but for what it cost to try and take. The wind changed on the last day of winter. It came sharp off the ridge, salt-laced and heavy with the scent of black powder. Mercy smelled it before dawn and knew the end had come. They weren't sending suits anymore. No pretense. No claims of right or future prosperity. They were sending men. Men to erase, to take, to bleed the land until it forgot her name. 30 riders, hired out of Texas and New Mexico, came before the snow melt. Wore black gloves and long coats, carried Winchesters slung over their backs and fire in their orders. "Burn the ranch, kill whoever stands." "No prisoners." Lark spotted them first, high on the butte above the east pasture, a spyglass shaking in her small hands. She didn't speak, just looked to Mercy with that hard stare she'd learned from watching her too long. "They're riding hard," she said. "They're not coming to scare us." "Good," Mercy said. "I'm done with fear." Sila's gathered the hands. Only 6 had stayed when the others left, warned by whispers, by letters with no return address. But those 6 didn't waver. They oiled their rifles and wrapped their knuckles in leather. Men who'd once worked cattle now stood ready to defend land not for what it was worth, but for who had bled to hold it. Mercy dug trenches near the fences, packed them with broken glass and pitch. She set snares in the brush, wired triplines with crude bells. The cook, old Nadine, filled whiskey bottles with lye and stuffed them with torn bandages. Lark dragged a crate of shells up to the loft and laid them out like coins. Her hands didn't tremble anymore. At dusk, Mercy sat alone in the field and opened the ledger. She tore the pages out, one by one, and lit each with a match. Let the fire bite through ink and paper and memory. The past had been paid in full. What came next was for the living. They struck before sunrise. Gunfire shattered the stillness, punched holes through the dawn. Riders galloped through the south gate first, where the fences had been loosened on purpose. The trap swallowed 5 whole. Horses broke legs, men howled. The rest surged in from the north. Silas took 3 down with a rifle from the hayloft before one slug caught him in the side. He dropped hard. Nadine dragged him behind the water trough, stuffed rags in the hole, cursed like it might sew him back together. Lark held the line near the barn. Short-stock shotgun braced against her hip, kicked like hell, but she didn't flinch. One man got close. She slit his knee open with a hay hook and shot him in the throat when he fell. Mercy moved through smoke and screams like she was born to it. She didn't shout, didn't charge. She killed slow, clean, one after another, a pistol in one hand, a rusted axe in the other. By mid-morning, 12 were dead, 5 had run. The rest regrouped near the well, tried to circle for a last push. She walked to meet them. Alone. Hat gone, shirt soaked, blood knotters streaked down her neck. "You came for land," she said. "You came for profit." She raised the axe. "You should have come for mercy." The last 7 died there, beneath the dead cottonwood. When it was done, she walked back to the house, blood in her footprints. Her arms shook, her mouth tasted copper. Lark met her at the porch, said nothing, just took her hand. Silas was still breathing, pale, sweating, teeth grit. "You win," he rasped. She sat beside him, laid her head against his chest. "No," she said, "I just survived." That spring, the land bloomed wild. Poplar buds burst open beside the creek. Birds nested in the rafters of the barn. Calves were born to the last few cows that hadn't been shot or scattered. The Blue S was not whole, but it was standing. The company never sent more. Too many dead, too many whispers. The men they'd hired had names, families, debts. Now they had graves. And no one wanted to test the black-veiled widow who guarded the hills. Mercy built a new ledger, this one blank. She gave it to Lark on her 12th birthday. "Your name on the cover," she said. "What you put inside is yours." Lark didn't speak, just held it like something sacred. Years passed. Silas died in his sleep, one hand curled around her old shawl. Mercy buried him beneath the ridge, where the wind blew clean and the grass grew tall. She carved his name into stone herself, no dates, just one sentence. He didn't look away. Mercy never remarried. She never left. Children born in the valley learned to ride on saddles she stitched, learned to shoot from the girl with the scarred throat and the sharp eyes. They called her Miss Merrick, never widow, never ma'am. The name became legend. Not for death, but for what it cost to live free. And when Mercy Merrick finally passed, old, quiet, in her chair facing the sunset, the county held silence for a day. No bells, no speeches, just quiet, as if the land itself was remembering. And at the edge of the Blue S, now overgrown with wildflowers and ghosts, Lark opened the ledger once more. She didn't write her past. She wrote what would come next. Because revenge had ended. But survival, real, fierce, soft-edged survival, that was a legacy worth keeping. And Mercy's name would ride with it, long after the world forgot why it once tried to beat her down.